The faint light of dusk filtered through the gaps in the faded curtain. Manuel tightly clutched the picture frame, his trembling fingers caressing the dusty glass. The yellowed photograph showed a time that seemed to belong to another life. His tear-filled eyes stared into the void, while the silence of the apartment was broken only by the incessant tick-tock of the old clock. He no longer expected visitors. It had been 3 years since he last heard the doorbell ring. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The building where Manuel lived was on a narrow street in the city's historic downtown. A 4-story building, with its facade peeled by time and rain, wooden windows that creaked at the slightest breath of wind. It was one of those places that seemed to hold stories in every crack, every damp stain. Apartment 302 had been his home for over 4 decades, ever since he moved in with Clarice, his wife, still young and full of plans for the future. At 83, Manuel Pereira carried the marks of a lifetime of work on his face, a simple man with calloused hands and a slightly stooped back. He had brown eyes that still sparkled when they found something that piqued his interest. His hair, once black and abundant, was now thin and completely white. His wardrobe basically consisted of the same 5 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, and a navy blue suit jacket kept for special occasions that rarely arrived. On that Thursday afternoon, the calendar marked May 15th. It was a day like any other for most people, but for Manuel, it was a date that made his heart ache in a different way. It had been exactly 5 years since Clarice's passing. Her absence was still a wound that wouldn't heal, a void that made its presence known in every corner of the apartment, in every object she had once touched. God takes the best ones first, he murmured to himself, as he carefully arranged the few plates on the dining table. Even living alone, Manuel maintained the habit of setting the table as if Clarice were still there. 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware, 2 glasses. It was his silent way of keeping his wife present. The television on in the corner of the living room was his main companion. The volume was always a little louder than necessary, a result of his hearing not being what it used to be. The news broadcast spoke of inflation, of city violence, of new government policies. Manuel listened to everything with an expression that mixed interest and distrust. The world outside seemed to be changing at a speed he could no longer keep up with. Next to the phone, on a dark wooden cabinet, was a neat pile of bills. Water, electricity, medications, the small corner grocery, where he ran a tab until he received his modest pension check. Manuel was methodical with his finances, noting every cent in a hardcover notebook, a legacy from his time working as an accountant at a textile company, now closed for years. His children, Robert and Christine, lived in different cities. Robert had moved to Los Angeles over 15 years ago, taking his wife and their 2 children. No teenagers whom Manuel only knew through occasional photos, sent on holidays like Christmas and their birthdays. The calls, once weekly, became monthly, then sporadic, until they were reduced to brief communications on specific dates. Christine lived in Chicago with her husband, a real estate developer. She had a busy life, always involved with social events and travel. "Her life is really hectic, Dad, you know how it is," was the phrase Manuel heard most often when he asked when she would visit him. Her last visit had been at Christmas 2 years ago, a quick stop for a few hours, just enough time for a hurried lunch and the delivery of presents that were still in their original wrapping. Manuel didn't blame his children, or at least he tried not to blame them. He repeated to himself that they had their own lives, their concerns, their problems, that the distance was only physical, that the love remained the same. But on the days of deepest silence, when loneliness weighed like a lead blanket, it was hard not to feel a pang of resentment, a bitter taste of abandonment. In the building hallway, neighbors came and went. New families had moved into apartments previously occupied by long-time acquaintances. Now they were strange faces who barely greeted him in the elevator. Young people in a hurry, always looking at their cell phone screens with headphones that created an invisible barrier against any attempt at conversation. Mrs. Carmen from 301 was the only old guard neighbor remaining, a widow like him. She would sometimes knock on his door bringing a slice of cake or just for coffee and a chat. She understood the silence and the loneliness, sharing the same pain of watching their children grow up, leave, and little by little become almost strangers. "They have their own lives, Manuel," Carmen would say, stirring her coffee with a silver spoon. "We can't expect them to stop everything for our sake." Manuel nodded in agreement, but deep down, something told him it wasn't quite like that. He wasn't asking them to stop their lives, just to remember that he was still a part of them, that he was still alive, that he still mattered. The landline phone, an old beige model, rarely rang. When it did, it was usually telemarketing calls or wrong numbers. Manuel answered with anticipation every time, a small flame of hope that ignited and quickly went out upon hearing the unfamiliar voice on the other end. One morning, the doorbell rang. Manuel quickly straightened his shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and walked to the door with a pounding heart. He wasn't expecting visitors. "Mr. Manuel, delivery for you." It was a young delivery driver, in a uniform from a local pharmacy. He brought the medications Manuel had ordered by phone: blood pressure medication, heart pills, cholesterol medicine for the bones that ached on cold mornings. The list grew with each doctor's visit. "Thank you, son," he said, trying to hide his disappointment. The young man smiled quickly and soon disappeared down the stairs. Manuel closed the door slowly and returned to his favorite armchair, the one facing the window, from where he could watch the street activity, the hurried people passing by, the kids coming home from school, life going on its course, indifferent to his loneliness. On the nightstand beside the armchair, a photo album remained open. Manuel spent hours flipping through those pages, reliving moments that now only existed in memory and on those pieces of paper. Wedding, birth of children, birthdays, graduations, vacation trips when the children were small and fit in the back seat of the blue Volkswagen Beetle, smiles frozen in time, hugs he no longer felt the warmth of on his skin. The calendar on the kitchen wall marked the days with a monotony only broken by doctor's appointments, marked in red pen, and bill payments in blue. Every now and then, an important date was circled. Grandchildren's birthdays, children's birthdays, the day they promised to call or visit. On his 83rd birthday, Manuel woke up early, as usual. He had his black coffee with a piece of toast, put on his least worn shirt and sat at the living room table, set as if expecting guests. The simple cake, bought from the corner bakery, was on a porcelain plate, surrounded by 6 clean glasses and carefully folded napkins. The phone rang at 10:37 a.m. It was Robert. "Dad, happy birthday." His son's voice, even from afar, brought a smile to Manuel's wrinkled face. "Thank you, son. It's good to hear your voice." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Robert explained that he was going into an important meeting, that he would call later, that the grandchildren sent their love, that he was sending a gift by mail. Manuel just agreed, thanked him, said everything was fine, that he shouldn't worry. Christine sent a text message. "Happy birthday, Dad. Sorry I can't call. Busy day. Love you." Manuel asked Mrs. Carmen for help reading the message on the cell phone he barely knew how to use, a gift from his children last Christmas. To make communication easier, they had said. For Manuel, it was just another complicated device that made strange noises and mostly stayed forgotten in the drawer. The day passed slowly. The cake remained untouched on the table until dusk, when Manuel finally cut a small slice for himself. He softly sang, "Happy birthday to you," as he looked at the photographs of his children and grandchildren scattered on the shelf. Then he put the rest of the cake in the refrigerator, where it would stay for days until it hardened and was finally thrown out. That night, lying in his double bed, now occupied only by him, Manuel stared at the ceiling. The silence was so profound he could hear his own heart beating. There was no anger in his thoughts, just a gentle sadness, a painful acceptance that this was perhaps how life ended. Not with a grand drama, but with a silence that grows until it swallows everything. The next day, as if wanting to shake off that melancholy, Manuel decided to go for a walk. He dressed carefully, took his carved walking stick, a gift from an old friend who had already passed, and slowly descended the stairs, refusing the elevator that sometimes got stuck between floors. The neighborhood streets had changed a lot in recent years. Old houses had given way to modern buildings, small family businesses replaced by large chain stores. Manuel walked slowly, observing every detail, every transformation, like a stranger in a place he once knew so well. In the local park, he sat on a bench under the shade of a leafy tree. Nearby, children played under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Young couples exchanged affections without caring who might see. Seniors like him played dominoes at concrete tables, laughing and arguing as if the outcome of that game were the most important thing in the world. Manuel observed everything with a mix of curiosity and detachment. It was like watching a movie where everyone had a role, except him. A grey-haired gentleman approached and sat beside him on the bench. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the stranger commented. Manuel agreed with a nod. He wasn't used to starting conversations with strangers, but there was something in that man's smile that inspired trust. "My name is Anthony," the man said, extending his hand. "Manuel," he replied, returning the handshake. Anthony was 78 and came to the park almost every day. He had been a widower for 10 years and lived with his daughter and 2 teenage grandchildren. "Sometimes it's hard, you know," Anthony confessed. "They have their own lives. It's her house. I feel like a guest, even knowing they love me." Manuel listened carefully. There was something comforting in finding someone who understood, who was going through similar situations. "At least you see them every day," Manuel commented, unable to hide a hint of envy. "Yes, I see them, but sometimes it's as if they don't see me," Anthony replied with a sad smile. "We're together, but each in their own world. The kids with their video games, my daughter with work, her husband with his soccer friends, and me with my memories." The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about the weather, about politics, about prices that kept rising, about medications and doctor's appointments, but mainly they talked about the loneliness that seemed to be the inevitable destiny of those who grew old. As the sun began to set, they said goodbye with a promise to meet again the next day. Manuel walked home with slightly lighter steps. The prospect of having someone to talk to, even if it was just an acquaintance from the park, brought a small comfort to his lonely heart. That night, for the first time in a long time, Manuel dreamed. Not of the past, as usually happened, but of the present. He dreamed of the park, of Anthony, of new conversations. When he woke up, there was a slight smile on his lips. Over the following weeks, the meeting at the park became part of Manuel's routine. Sometimes, in addition to Anthony, other seniors joined them. Stories were shared, advice exchanged, laughter that had not left their throats in a long time. One of those afternoons, Anthony arrived accompanied by a white-haired woman with an elegant bun. It was his sister, Helen, who was visiting the city. "This is the friend I told you about," Anthony said, introducing Manuel. Helen smiled, her blue eyes shining with a vivacity that didn't match the deep wrinkles around them. She was 75, but had an energy that many young people would envy. "Anthony told me about your meetings," she said, sitting next to Manuel. He said you have interesting stories. Manuel blushed slightly, unaccustomed to receiving attention, especially from a woman. Helen had a way of looking directly into his eyes that left him both uncomfortable and flattered. The conversation flowed easily between the three. Helen said she was a retired teacher, that she had traveled to several countries after retiring, that she did volunteer work at a community library in the city where she lived. Old age is only sad for those who choose to surrender to it, Helen said at one point. Of course, we have limitations, pains, losses, but we are still alive, aren't we? Her words hit Manuel like a flash of clarity. He had spent so much time focused on what he had lost, his wife, the constant presence of his children, full health, that he had forgotten to value what he still had, life itself. When they said goodbye that afternoon, Helen handed Manuel a card with her phone number. "I'll be in the city for 2 weeks," she explained. "If you want to talk, just call." Manuel put the card in his shirt pocket, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. That night, when he got home, he didn't turn on the television immediately as usual. He sat in the armchair and stared at the card for long minutes, thinking of Helen's smile, her words about old age, the possibility of a friendship opening like an unexpected flower in the winter of his life. The next day, he gathered all his courage and called. Helen's voice on the other end of the line sounded cheerful, as if she had been waiting for that call. "I was thinking, Manuel, have you been to the city's cultural center? They have an exhibition of old photographs that I think you'd like." Manuel hadn't been to the cultural center in years. In fact, he rarely left his usual circuit: home, bakery, pharmacy, doctor's office, park. The idea of visiting an exhibition seemed both tempting and frightening. "I don't know if—" he began, hesitant. "Come on, it'll be good," Helen insisted gently. "If you don't like it, we can just grab a coffee and leave." Something in Helen's quiet determination overcame Manuel's insecurities. They agreed to meet at the entrance of the cultural center the next day at 2 p.m. That morning, Manuel woke up earlier than usual. He took a long shower, carefully trimmed his beard, chose his best shirt, light blue, with no missing buttons, and even put on a little of the cologne Christine had given him 2 birthdays ago, and which was still half full. The cultural center was about a 20-minute walk from his house. Manuel decided to walk, enjoying the clear, mild day. As he walked, he felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if, after years of living in black and white, a timid color began to seep into the corners of his existence. Helen was already there when he arrived, punctual as a clock. She wore a simple navy blue dress and a pearl necklace that enhanced the natural elegance of her posture. When she saw him, she broke into a warm smile. "You came," she said, as if she'd had some doubt. "A promise is a promise," Manuel replied, trying to hide his nervousness. The exhibition was a collection of photographs of the city from the 1950s and 1960s. For Manuel, it was like a trip back in time. He recognized streets that were now unrecognizable, buildings that no longer existed, anonymous people walking through a city he had known so well in his youth. "Look, the old train station!" he exclaimed, pointing to one of the photos. "I worked there for 2 years before going to the textile company." Helen listened with genuine interest as Manuel, stimulated by the images, recounted stories that had been stored for years in his memory. He spoke about his first job, about how he met Clarice at a community dance, about the first years of their marriage, when they lived in a rented room and saved every penny to buy their own home. "You have a rich life, Manuel," Helen commented when they finally sat down in the cultural center's cafe. "So many stories, so many experiences." Manuel lowered his eyes, suddenly aware of how much he had talked. "Sorry, I must be tiring you." Helen lightly touched his hand. A simple gesture that sent a shiver down Manuel's arm. "Not at all," she assured him. "It's a pleasure to hear your stories. You know what the problem with our age is? People think we only have a past, that we have no present or future." Manuel reflected on those words as he walked home late that afternoon. Helen was right. He himself had accepted this role of mere spectator of life, as if his days were just a waiting room for the inevitable end. But something in that encounter, in Helen's energy, in the memories awakened by the old photographs, had lit a small flame in his chest. In the days that followed, Manuel and Helen met a few more times. They went to the movie theater to see an American film, visited the botanical garden, had lunch at a simple restaurant that served homemade food. To any observer, they would just be two seniors enjoying each other's company. But for Manuel, it was as if a new world was opening before him. One afternoon, sitting on a bench in the botanical garden, Helen spoke of her departure. "I'm going home next week," she said, looking at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. "My daughter is expecting me." Manuel felt a tightness in his chest. He knew this moment would come, but still the news hit him hard. "I understand," he merely said, not knowing what else to add. Helen turned to him, her blue eyes as penetrating as ever. "But this doesn't have to be goodbye, Manuel. There are phones, there's the internet, and there's the possibility of visits." The idea of staying in touch, of having something to look forward to beyond medical appointments and forgotten birthdays, brought new comfort to Manuel's solitary heart. "I'd like that," he confessed, feeling both vulnerable and courageous for expressing such a simple yet profound desire. Helen smiled, that smile that lit up her entire face and seemed to chase away the shadows of any sadness. "Me too, Manuel, me too." On the eve of Helen's departure, Manuel invited her to dinner at his apartment. He had never been a great cook, that had always been Clarice's specialty, but he knew how to prepare a roasted chicken with potatoes that his wife had always praised. He spent the entire day in the kitchen, cutting, seasoning, checking the doneness, setting the table with the best dinner set, the one kept for special occasions. He even put a clean tablecloth on the table, something he hadn't done in years. When the doorbell rang, promptly at 7 p.m., Manuel felt his heart race as if he were a teenager on his first date. He opened the door with a mix of anxiety and happiness. Helen looked beautiful, in a simple but elegant dress and a light perfume that reminded him of garden flowers. She carried a small box of chocolates and a bottle of wine. "I hope you like red wine," she said, handing him the gifts. "I like anything that comes from you," Manuel replied, surprising himself with his own boldness. Dinner proceeded in an intimate and light atmosphere. They talked about books they had read, about old movies they both loved, about places they would like to visit. Manuel felt more alive than he had in years, as if every word exchanged, every smile, every glance was a fresh breath of life into his being. After dessert, a milk custard bought from the corner pastry shop, they sat in the living room. Helen noticed the photographs scattered on the furniture. "Are these your children?" she asked, pointing to a picture frame where Robert and Christine, still children, smiled embracing. "Yes," Manuel confirmed, a trace of sadness crossing his face. "Robert and Christine." Helen noticed the change in his expression. "You don't see them often, I imagine." It wasn't a question, but a realization, spoken with the kindness of someone who understood the pain behind the unspoken words. "No," Manuel admitted. "They have their lives, their families." "And you don't fit into them," Helen completed, with the same gentleness. Manuel was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of that truth he had never admitted so clearly. "I guess not," he finally said, his voice low. "Not the way I'd like to." Helen moved closer and took his hand in hers. Her hands were warm and soft, conveying a sense of comfort Manuel hadn't felt in a long time. "You know, Manuel, I went through something similar. After my husband passed away, I felt like a burden to my daughter. I kept waiting for her to visit me, to call, to remember me. And every time it didn't happen, it was like a small wound reopened." Manuel listened intently, recognizing so much of his own experience in that story. "What changed?" he asked, genuinely curious. Helen smiled, her eyes shining with serene wisdom. "I changed. I realized I was placing all the responsibility for my happiness on her shoulders. I started building my own life, doing things that gave me pleasure, meeting new people. And you know what happened? Our relationship improved. She began to see me not as a problem to be solved, but as a whole person, with desires, interests, a life of her own." Helen's words resonated deeply with Manuel. He had never thought that way, always assuming his role was to wait, that the initiative should come from his children. "I'm not saying it's easy," Helen continued, "nor that the responsibility is all ours. But we can choose how we react to the situation. We can choose to live fully, even with the absences that hurt us." When Helen said goodbye, it was past midnight. At the door there was a moment of hesitation, a silence laden with possibilities. Then, with a naturalness that surprised them both, their lips met in a soft, brief kiss, laden with promise. "See you soon, Manuel," Helen said, her blue eyes shining in the dim light of the hallway. "See you soon," he replied, knowing deep in his heart that those words were true, that it wasn't a definitive goodbye. After Helen left, Manuel sat back in his favorite armchair. The apartment seemed different, as if Helen's presence had left a trail of light that still lingered. He looked at the photographs of his children, at the old furniture, at the familiar corners of that place that was his home. Something had changed within him. A seed had been planted, a possibility of seeing life differently. It wouldn't be easy. He knew that. Years of habits don't break overnight. The loneliness, the feeling of abandonment, the silent resentment, all that was still there. But now there was also something else, a small flame of hope, a possibility of choosing a different path. That night, before going to sleep, Manuel did something he hadn't done in a long time. He wrote a letter, not to Helen, though he thought of her as the words flowed. He wrote to Robert and Christine. It wasn't a letter of accusation or lamentation. It was a letter of recognition, of acceptance, but also of affirmation. He told them about his meeting with Helen, about the photographs at the cultural center, about the conversations at the park. He spoke about how he missed them, yes, but also about how he was discovering that there was still life to be lived, choices to be made, joys to be found. "I don't want to be a burden," he wrote, his hand trembling but resolute. "I want to be a part of your lives, but I also want to build my own. I want you to know that I love you, that I always will, but that I also need to love myself." Upon finishing the letter, he felt a relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't know if he'd have the courage to send it, if the words would be understood as he intended. But the simple act of putting those feelings on paper was, in itself, an important step. The days that followed Helen's departure were filled with reflection and small changes. Manuel continued to go to the park, talking with Anthony and other seniors he had met there. One day, he discovered that there was a reading group that met weekly at the public library. Hesitantly, he decided to participate. The group was small, 6 people, most of them retirees like him. They read novels, poetry, short stories. They discussed passionately, laughed together, shared life experiences that echoed in the pages of the books. Manuel, timid at first, soon found himself actively participating, rediscovering the pleasure of reading he had abandoned years ago. Helen called regularly. Their telephone conversations were precious moments. windows opened to a world beyond the walls of apartment 302. They talked about the books Manuel was reading in the club, about the painting classes Helen had started taking, about plans for a possible reunion in the future. 2 weeks after sending the letter, yes, he finally mustered the courage and sent it, the phone rang one Thursday night. It was Robert. "Dad? I got your letter." His son's voice sounded different, with a note of emotion Manuel hadn't heard in a long time. "Oh, yes, the letter," he replied, his heart beating a little faster. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, as if Robert was carefully choosing his words. "I don't know what to say, Dad. Your letter. It made me think a lot. You didn't need to say anything, son. I just wanted to share what I was feeling." Robert took a deep breath. I think maybe we've drifted apart more than we should have. It's easy to get caught up in your own life, in your own worries." "I know," Manuel said with genuine understanding. "I didn't write to accuse anyone. I just wanted to open my heart. We're thinking of visiting you next month," Robert continued. "The kids are on school break, if that's okay with you." Manuel felt a wave of joy wash over him. "Of course, son. Of course." After hanging up, Manuel stood for a long time looking at the phone, as if it were a magical object capable of materializing wishes. He had no illusions that everything would change overnight. He knew that Robert and his family's visit would be just a beginning, that there would still be distance, still be absences. But it was a beginning. A possibility of rebuilding bridges that had been worn down by time and mutual neglect. The following week, he also received a call from Christine. The conversation was briefer, more contained, but it also held a promise of reconciliation. She wanted to know more about Helen, about the reading group, about the changes he had mentioned in the letter. "You seem different, Dad," she commented, with a note of surprise in her voice. "I am different," Manuel admitted. "Still learning, still stumbling, but trying to look forward, not just back." When 3 months had passed since his first meeting with Helen, Manuel received a surprise. She called, saying she would be in the city the following week. "My daughter is getting married," she explained, "and I want you to escort me at the ceremony." Manuel felt a mix of joy and apprehension. "Are you sure? I don't know anyone in your family." "That's exactly why I want you to come," Helen replied, with that gentle determination he already knew so well. "It's time for you to know a part of my life, just as I've known yours." The wedding was on a Saturday afternoon, in a small chapel decorated with white and lilac flowers. Manuel wore his navy blue suit jacket, the one reserved for special occasions, and a tie Helen had given him the week before. He felt nervous, but also strangely at peace. Helen's daughter, Marianne, was a middle-aged woman, with her mother's same warm smile. When Helen introduced them, Manuel was greeted with a spontaneous hug that took him by surprise. "Mom talks a lot about you," Marianne said with genuine affection. "It's good to finally meet you." The ceremony was simple and moving. Seeing the sparkle in Helen's eyes as her daughter exchanged vows with the groom, Manuel felt a pang of nostalgia, recalling the day Robert got married. He and Clarice had been there, of course, but somehow he had felt like a stranger, a mere extra in a ceremony that seemed to have been rehearsed without his presence. During the reception, Helen and Manuel danced together. She rested her head on his shoulder as they slowly swayed to the sound of an old song they both knew well. It was a moment of perfect harmony, mutual understanding and acceptance. "Thank you for bringing me," Manuel murmured in her ear. Helen pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "Thank you for coming, for being a part of my life." Those simple words contained everything Manuel wanted to hear, everything he himself wanted to say. Being a part of each other's lives, With all the challenges and joys that came with it, was a gift they had both found when they least expected it. The week after the ceremony, Robert arrived with his wife and children for the promised visit. Apartment 302 came alive again, filled with young voices, laughter, small family conflicts, the loving chaos of a reunited family. Manuel introduced Helen to them, not hiding the nature of his relationship. There was an initial moment of surprise. After all, for the children, it was difficult to imagine their father with anyone other than their mother. But Helen's captivating personality soon won everyone over. That night, when they were finally alone in their hotel room, Robert confessed to his wife, "I never imagined my dad like this. So alive. You know, in recent years, whenever we saw him, he seemed so resigned." "People change," she replied with wisdom, "or maybe they just show parts of themselves that were always there, but that we hadn't noticed." The visit lasted only 3 days, but it was enough for something important to begin to be rebuilt. Before leaving, Robert promised to return soon, perhaps at Christmas. And this time, the promise sounded different, more tangible, more real. The following months brought more changes. Helen returned to her city but came regularly to visit Manuel. Sometimes she stayed at his place, other times at a small hotel nearby. They no longer hid their relationship, though they also felt no need to define it for the world. What they had was theirs, built with the patience and wisdom that only years can bring. Manuel continued to attend the reading group, now as one of its most active members. The suggestion to start visiting schools to read to children had been his. Once a month, they would go to a local public school and spend the afternoon reading stories to the little ones, who listened with attention and curiosity. "How do you do the different voices?" a little girl of about 6 asked after one of the readings. "My children loved it when I read to them before bed," Manuel replied with a nostalgic smile. "I learned to do the voices to make the story more fun." The sparkle in the child's eyes, the way she hung on every word, reminded him of when Robert and Christine were that age. Of the nights they squeezed into their small beds to hear, "Just one more story, Dad, please." At home, Manuel started using his cell phone more frequently. With Helen's help and his grandchildren's during their visit, he had learned to send messages, make video calls, and view photos and videos that his children shared in family groups. Technology, which once seemed a barrier, became a bridge to maintain ties, even at a distance. One day, he received a call from Christine. She seemed nervous, hesitant. "Dad, I've been thinking. Anna's sweet 16 is next month." Anna was his granddaughter, Christine's daughter, a teenager Manuel knew mainly through photographs and brief encounters over the years. "We're organizing a small party," Christine continued. "Nothing too big, just family and close friends, and we really wanted you to come." Manuel felt his heart race. Chicago was hours away, and it had been years since he had traveled so far. I don't know, honey. It's not that easy for me to travel alone." "Helen is also invited, of course," Christine quickly added. "And we can arrange everything for you. Tickets, hotel, whatever you need." The genuine concern in his daughter's voice touched Manuel deeply. After hanging up, he thought about the proposal. The idea of a trip, of seeing the city where his daughter lived, of participating in an important moment in his granddaughter's life, was tempting. He called Helen to tell her about the invitation. "I think we should go," she said without hesitation. "It would be a wonderful opportunity." "I don't know if I have the energy for a trip like that," Manuel admitted. "We'll go together," Helen assured him, "taking care of each other, as always." Anna's Sweet 16 party was a moving event. Seeing his granddaughter, now a young woman, dancing with her father in the middle of the ballroom, Manuel felt a lump in his throat. How quickly time passed. It seemed like yesterday she was just a baby in Christine's arms. During the party, He observed the family interactions, the hugs, the smiles, the small tensions quickly resolved. It was strange, and yet comforting to realize he was part of that universe, that web of relationships that, despite the distances and absences, still included him. At one point in the evening, Anna approached him, beautiful in her light blue dress. "Grandpa, can I ask you a question?" Manuel smiled, touched by the intimacy with which his granddaughter called him, despite their few encounters over the years. "Of course, my dear." "My mom gave me this," Anna said, showing a small antique music box. "She said it was yours. Is it true you brought it from a trip to France?" Manuel took the box carefully. It was an object he had bought in Paris over 40 years ago, during the only international trip he and Clarice had taken. A present for Christine on her 12th birthday, the box played a soft melody when opened. "Yes, it's true. Your grandma and I went to France to visit some distant cousins. When I saw this little box in an antique shop in Paris, I knew immediately your mother would love it." Anna's eyes sparkled with genuine interest. "Can you tell me more? About the trip? About what it was like when Mum was little?" That simple question opened the floodgates of Manuel's memories. For the next hour, sitting in a quieter corner of the ballroom, with Anna by his side and eventually other family members joining to listen, he told stories of his youth, of his children's childhood, of a time that seemed so distant and yet lived so vividly in his memory. At the hotel, late that night, Helen found Manuel contemplating the city from the room window. The expression on his face was serene, almost solemn. "A penny for your thoughts," she said, approaching him. Manuel smiled without diverting his eyes from the night view. "I was thinking how strange life is, how sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves." Helen hugged him from behind, resting her head on his shoulder. "And did you find yourself?" Manuel turned to face her, his eyes reflecting a peace he had achieved step by step, day after day. "I'm still on the way," he answered honestly, "but at least now I know I'm walking, not just waiting." That trip marked a new chapter in Manuel's life. Upon returning home, he carried not only photographs and memories, but a new determination. The relationship with his children would continue to require effort, mutual understanding, constant adjustments. There would still be moments of loneliness, of absence, of unfilled silences. But there was also a new clarity, an acceptance that was not resignation, but wisdom. Apartment 302 no longer seemed a prison of memories, but a home where the past coexisted peacefully with the present. Clarice's photographs remained in their place of honor, a tribute to a love that would always be a fundamental part of who he was. But now, beside them, there were also recent photos. Manuel and Helen in the park, at Marianne's wedding, at Anna's party, Manuel with the reading group, Manuel with Robert and his family during their visit. On a Sunday afternoon, about a year after that first meeting in the park that changed his life, Manuel was arranging some books on the shelf when the phone rang. It was Helen. "I was thinking," she said without preamble, "what do you think about us living together?" The question caught Manuel by surprise. Not that they had never talked about it, but always vaguely, as a distant possibility. "Would you come here?" he asked, trying to process the idea. "Actually, I was thinking of something different," Helen replied. "There's a lovely senior living community in my city, independent apartments, but with medical support, group activities, all very well structured. I visited yesterday and really liked it." Manuel slowly sat down. The idea of leaving apartment 302, the place where he had lived for over 40 years, where he had raised his children, where Clarice had passed away, seemed frightening. It meant leaving behind not just a physical space, but a whole life of memories. "It's an important decision," Helen continued, noticing his hesitation. "You don't have to answer now. Think about it calmly. You could come visit the place before deciding." After hanging up, Manuel sat in his armchair for a long time, looking around at the familiar walls. at the objects that told the story of his life. Moving would mean giving up all that, but it would also mean a new beginning, a new phase alongside someone who had brought light back into his existence. The following week, he told Robert about Helen's proposal during a video call. "What do you think?" he asked, genuinely interested in his son's opinion. Robert seemed surprised, but not opposed. "It's your decision, Dad, if it's what you want, if you think you'll be happy there." "I'm scared," Manuel confessed, with a frankness that surprised them both. "Scared to leave this place, scared to start over at 84. Robert was silent for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. "You know, Dad, you've always been the bravest man I know. You raised 2 children practically alone after Mom got sick, worked 2 jobs to give us a decent life, never complained, never gave up. If anyone can start over, it's you." His son's words touched Manuel deeply. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, Robert truly saw him, not as a lonely senior who needed occasional attention, but as a complete man with a history, with strength, with the ability to choose. "Besides," Robert continued, "if you don't like it, you can always come back. The apartment will be here." That simple realization brought immense relief. Yes, the apartment would be there. The memories would be there. He wasn't abandoning his past, just choosing a new future. A month later, Manuel traveled to visit the community. It was a pleasant place with green areas, comfortable apartments, people of similar age who seemed active and happy. He spent a week staying with Helen, getting to know the routine, participating in activities, imagining himself living there. The day before he returned, he made his decision. "I want to try," he told Helen as they dined on the small balcony of her apartment. "It won't be easy, but I want to try." The look Helen gave him at that moment was worth every gram of courage he had needed to gather to make that decision. The following months were filled with preparations. There was much to organize: the sale of the apartment, the decision of what to take and what to leave behind, the goodbyes. Robert and Christine came to help, spending an entire week organizing, packing, resolving practical matters. During that time, they talked as they hadn't in years. Amidst cardboard boxes and memories unearthed from old closets, they laughed, cried, remembered moments that had been important to all of them. "Remember this doll?" Christine asked, holding a faded cloth doll found at the back of a closet. "You fixed it so many times." "I remember," Manuel smiled. "You dragged her everywhere. It was impossible to keep her whole." Small moments like these re-stitched an intimacy that had been lost over the years. On the eve of the move, Manuel asked to be alone in the empty apartment. The boxes had already been taken, the larger furniture sold or donated. Only the bed and his old armchair remained, which would go with him to his new home. He sat on the living room floor, in the exact spot where the dining table had been, where so many family meals had taken place. He let the memories come, the first dinner with Clarice in that apartment, still with borrowed furniture, Robert learning to walk, taking hesitant steps on that same floor, Christine studying for college entrance exams, books scattered all over the table, Clarice's last birthday, when she was already sick but still smiled with that strength that had always characterized her. "I'm not abandoning you," he murmured, as if speaking to the ghosts of the past. "I'm taking you with me, in here." He touched his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady, carrying in its rhythm all the joys and sorrows that had made him the man he was. The next morning, when Robert came to pick him up, Manuel was ready, not just with the small suitcase by the door, but ready within himself, at peace with the past, open to the future. Before leaving, he took one last walk through the empty apartment. In each room, he paused for a moment, saying goodbye in silence. At the door, he turned one last time, looking at the space that had been the stage for so many chapters of his life. Then, with a sigh that was not of sadness, but of acceptance, he closed the door. The senior living community was a 3-hour drive away. Manuel watched the landscape through the car window, the trees rushing past, the small towns, the roads unrolling like threads connecting one chapter of his life to another. Robert drove in silence, respecting his father's moment of reflection. When they finally arrived, Helen was waiting at the entrance, her face illuminated by that smile that always lit something up inside Manuel. By her side, to Manuel's surprise and joy, were Christine and her family, and also Marianne, Helen's daughter, with her husband. "Welcome to your new home," Helen said, hugging him tightly. The apartment they would occupy was cozy, with large windows that let in plenty of light. Some of Manuel's furniture was already there, harmoniously mixed with Helen's, creating an environment that was neither entirely his nor entirely hers, but theirs. Over the next week, Robert and Christine stayed in a nearby hotel. They helped Manuel settle in, get to know the surroundings, and create a routine in that new place. It was no longer like before, when visits were rare and hurried. There was genuine interest, a desire to be part of this new phase of their father's life. On the night before they left, they had a family dinner at Manuel and Helen's apartment. Around the table, 3 generations talked, laughed, and shared stories. "A toast," Robert proposed, raising his glass, "to new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, and Manuel's eyes met Helen's over the crystal. The toast was to new beginnings, yes, but also to continuity, to the invisible thread that connected all that had been to all that was yet to be. Later that night, lying in their new bed, Manuel and Helen talked in low voices, planning the days ahead, the small adjustments they still wanted to make to the apartment, the activities they wished to try. "You know what surprised me most these past few days?" Manuel commented. "What?" Helen asked, caressing his white hair. "How easy it was. I spent so much time afraid of changes, stuck in the past, and now it feels so natural." Helen smiled in the dim light. "Because it was time. Because you were ready." Manuel reflected on those words. Yes, he was ready. Ready for this new chapter, for this new chance at life that opened before him like an unexpected gift. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, Manuel and Helen built together a routine that combined moments of tranquility and stimulating activities. They participated in the community gardening group, attended a local senior choir, and received regular visits from their children and grandchildren. Time, which once seemed an enemy, dragging slowly between the silent walls of apartment 302, now flowed gently, filled with meaning. There were challenges, of course, days of physical pain, small disagreements, news of friends who passed away, health concerns that became more fragile. But there was also a deep joy, a gratitude for each new dawn, for each small shared discovery. On his 85th birthday, the apartment was too small for so many guests. Robert and his family, Christine and her husband, the teenage grandchildren, Marianne and her husband, friends from the community, from the choir, even Anthony, the friend from the park, who had been responsible for his meeting with Helen, all gathered to celebrate not just another year of life, but a life that had found its deepest meaning in the autumn of its days. Looking around at those people who now were part of his story in different ways, Manuel felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. It wasn't just happiness, although there was happiness there. It was something deeper, more complete. It was belonging. That night, after everyone had left and only the comfortable silence of the night enveloped the apartment, Manuel hugged Helen tightly. "Thank you," he simply said. "For what?" she asked, surprised. "For showing me that it's never too late, that there was still life to be lived, love to be felt, joy to be found." Helen smiled, that smile that illuminated not only her face, but the entire room around her. "We're two stubborn old folks who refuse to give up," she said, with a mischievous twinkle in her blue eyes that even time hadn't managed to erase. "And we still have a lot ahead of us," Manuel agreed, feeling in his chest the quiet certainty that regardless of how much time they still had, every moment would be lived to its fullest, no longer as a passive spectator, but as the protagonist of his own story, a story that, even in its final chapters, still held the beauty and dignity of a life truly lived. If this story touched your heart, like, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.